Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope you're doing remarkably well. So much love to each and every one of you. I'm very well, and all the better for spending quality time with you. And before we get started, don't forget to get that quintessential drink, whether it's something ice cold and refreshing because the weather's hot, or something warm and comforting because the weather's cold, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. So let's get started. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the shrill, high-pitched sound of the telephone enveloped the pristine silence with its offensive, intrusive and strident tone. It was annoyingly ringing off the hook, rather like a spoilt, petulant child demanding attention and stamping her obstinate feet in retribution because she wasn't getting any. There were university students lying in crumpled heaps in lumpy sleeping bags scattered liberally across the floor of my sister's apartment, rather like they do in the lobbies of international airports, most especially places like Dubai, where you're almost tripping over sleeping bodies lying everywhere, all waiting for their international flights. It would seem my sister's opulent, rather lavish Seattle apartment had become a sea of bodies that looked almost half dead, all in the throes of recovery from the alcoholic frenzy of the previous night. The blurred, obscure memories of the previous evening were now hazy and fuzzy to me, but I seemed to remember the beginning part of the evening where we'd bopped the night away to 80s disco music. Those fabulous songs were still drumming away in my ears with their rhythmic beat. I seem to remember we'd ordered dozens of pizzas from the local parlour across the road, washed down with copious amounts of alcoholic beverages, and I'd gone too far. My heart sank, and feelings of guilt-ridden shame descended over my consciousness as I visualised my sister's mortified reaction, if she did indeed have a bird's-eye view of the dreadful state her apartment was now in. I can assure you I would be turfed out of my lodgings in a heartbeat if she had seen its current deplorable state, for it looked like a doss-house. My sister was a very particular, punctilious person who kept her apartment in spotless condition and was exceedingly house-proud. Luckily for me, she was out of town for a couple of nights and would be none the wiser. Well, that was if I got my act together. The red wine stains on her cream carpet needed cleaning out, and the pizza boxes that were scattered precariously across the floor, along with the empty beer and wine bottles, needed throwing out at once. Also, the bathroom needed cleaning because someone had thrown up in there, and the nauseating stench had descended over the bedroom suite and wasn't pretty at all. The quintessential evidence of our night-long alcoholic binge was clear to see, and needed to be removed without a trace, or there would be hell to pay, and I didn't want to face the wrath of my cantankerous sister. The vociferous phone persisted in its ear-piercing frenzy, and the floor was wiggling with groaning students saying, "Someone, oh someone, please answer that dreadful phone! It's doing my head in!" I remember imagining that the person at the other end of the phone had to be a monster. Who else could they be? I mean, how dare they wake us up at this early hour of the morning, I thought, glancing briefly at my watch. Goodness gracious, it was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Where had the time vanished to? Reluctantly, I wiggled out of my sleeping bag, resigned to answering that tiresome phone that had now morphed into a nagging old woman that I seriously wanted to throttle. My head was thundering with a violent headache that pounded on the front side of my head and seemed to travel to the back, and there was no sign of it abating. I was in no doubt I was suffering a serious hangover from overdoing it last night with all my university friends. I was beginning to regret the spur-of-the-moment decision to have this party that had sprung up at the very last minute like a late seasonal flower. It hadn't helped that last night I'd seriously overindulged myself and drunk like a fish. "Hello," I said, lifting up the receiver, resisting the temptation to scream down the phone, "Will you please shut up and leave us all alone?" "Hello," came a woman's syrupy sweet voice. "Can I speak to Fleming, please?" "That's me," I said. "How can I help you?" "Oh, I'm so glad I've caught you," came the woman's voice with an audible, relieved sigh. "Oh, I'm so sorry to phone you last minute, especially on a Sunday afternoon like this. It's awfully rude of me, I know, but I'm in a desperate need of help. Something came up at the very last minute. A sister of mine in Boston, well, she's not very well. I need to go and see her. I believe you offer house-sitting services. Word around the grapevine is you're very reliable and trustworthy. Dorothy Pender gave me your number, and she thinks the world of you. Insists that you're very good with animals. So not to beat around the bush, I need you in my employ for a few days. Periwinkle is a very particular animal, so I know that I can feel assured that under your charge she'll be in excellent hands. I would like to book you, please, for a week or so, if that's agreeable with you. Sorry to hear about your sister, I said. That's not good news. I hope she gets better soon. I'm quite willing to help you under the circumstances. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow night, if that's agreeable with you, she said. Tomorrow night, I thought aghast. That was not much advance warning at all, but still the money would come in handy, so I would be a fool to refuse this opportunity. As being a student, I wasn't exactly flush with cash. Any opportunity to make a bob or two was not to be sneezed at. That'll be fine, I said. What am I house-sitting exactly? A dog or a cat, I asked. And then adding a little humour to the equation, I added, I draw the line at babysitting lions and tigers. Oh, heavens, no, nothing like that, came the woman's voice. Well, to be fair, she is a feline from the cat family, but she's a domestic cat called Periwinkle. Of course she thinks she's a goddess. She's terribly vain. Now, she is very particular, incredibly fussy, so I have prepared a menu for her, and I would be much obliged if you could follow it exactly, with just a little poaching and steaming and frying here and there. Will that be all right with you? It's very simplistic, really. I raised a quizzical, rather amused brow at the other end of the phone, knowing full well that this was a punctilious cat owner who was possibly more discriminating and particular than the cat itself. It sounds straightforward enough, I said. I had dealt with her assiduous kind before. Now, there are a couple of other things I need to tell you about. I have a neighbour living next door who's diabetic. Her name is Alice Harper. I always phone her every day at 5 o'clock to be exact in the afternoon, just to check on her. I worry about her, because she has a mind like a sieve. She's terribly forgetful. I call her to make sure she's taken her meds, because if her blood sugar sinks too low, it can be problematic. Of course, I said. No problem at all. I'll phone her at 5 every afternoon. I have a diabetic aunt. I know the score. Well, that's good to know, she said. Oh, and by the way, I do have a few house plants that require watering. Fine, I said, taking down all her details and replacing the receiver. Tomorrow night, I thought. That didn't bring me much time to get over my hangover and to clean up my sister's place. As it happens, time did go by very speedily. Thankfully, I'd succeeded in cleaning my sister's flat. Before long, I was driving my white 1980s Ford Pinto two-door hatchback towards Elizabeth Churchill's home that was located in a rural neighbourhood in Washington state. In those days, some of the roads were still rather rough and ready and not very well appointed, although many were beginning to be tarmacked. I was to discover that although Elizabeth's neighbourhood was quite well built up, most of the residential properties were heavily fringed by vast areas of forest, wildflower meadows, farmers' fields, rugged outcrops, along with pretty streams. It really was all rather beguiling, and without question breathtakingly beautiful. It was good to get away from Seattle into the fresh, crisp air of the countryside. This house-sitting opportunity could potentially be rather fun, I thought, thankful that I'd brought my hiking boots with me, along with my mountain bicycle, and some of the books I needed to study. It most certainly meant that the house-sitting of Periwinkle was going to offer me the opportunity during the day to go on a short hiking stint or a cycling adventure. And why not? I didn't have to hang out at the house all day with a cat that probably was sooner I wasn't there anyway. As I arrived at Elizabeth Churchill's home and parked my car under the carport, I was struck with how enchantingly twee her picturesque cottage appeared to be. If you'd placed it in the heart of the English countryside, it would not have looked out of place. It had that quaint, idiosyncratic old-world charm about it, and oozed tons and tons of character. I'd never stayed in an eccentric, whimsical cottage like this before, and I was intrigued and tantalised by it. It was symmetrical in shape, with a front facade that was built from stone, and the rest of the house was built from whitewashed brick, and there were complementary large sash windows and a perfectly central front door that was painted in a bright daffodil yellow colour, which surprisingly worked. There was a cobbled stone pathway that led to the front door, fringed by large beds filled with colourful blooming roses and hedges of lavender, where butterflies and bees were busying themselves dancing from one bloom to another in their phenomenal act of pollination. I walked up the stone steps and reached under the pot plant holder for the front door keys, where Elizabeth had told me I'd find them. Ah, there they were. Good, I thought happily. They jingled in my hands, and the door creaked as I prized it open. I was surprised to see that inside the cottage was an open modern floor plan, vastly contradicting the outside appearance of the house, which seemed rather incongruous, but still it was very stylishly executed and was cosy and inviting, with contemporary artwork on the walls and exquisite comfortable furnishings. The lower floor just sprawled out into one large seamless open space, with the kitchen and living areas interwoven together so fluidly, along with a delightful wood-burning stove and a very substantial ornate marble fireplace that was positioned pride of place in the centre of the room. On one side was a very well-appointed bookshelf that lined the entire wall, overflowing with stunning books, suggesting that Elizabeth Churchill was a woman devoted to reading. But with a surname like Churchill, that was not surprising to me at all. Sunlight flickered through the open windows, bespeckling the floor in a radiant golden yellow light, and even the reflection of the windows could be seen on the white marbled floors, all covered with exquisite rich Persian rugs in resplendent reds and golds. As I had secretly suspected, Periwinkle was found lying stretched out on one of the sofas that was basked in the warm sunlight, looking like the Queen of Sheba. The window possessed a pretty view over the emerald turf, along with the brightly coloured beds of roses bursting with vibrant reds, pinks and yellow blooms. I began running my fingers softly through her luxuriant silky coat of long white hair. She looked up at me from a sleeping position, very suspiciously. Then she closed her eyes slowly and began to purr, as she enjoyed my skillful massage. It was so good sitting in the sun after the long drawn-out winter we'd recently experienced. I decided to join Periwinkle on the couch, and I grabbed one of Elizabeth's books titled The Murder of Cherry Page, and became so embroiled in the book, written by an unknown author. It was so good, I couldn't put it down. Periwinkle had surreptitiously wormed her way onto my lap, and the two of us became like lizards, wallowing in the sunshine all day. At this rate, I wouldn't get any hiking done, let alone any of my students' studies, but I had to find out who had murdered Cherry. Finally, I raised myself out of the couch, as now the room had become significantly cooler, and the sun had all but faded away. I ambled over to the kitchen with Periwinkle trotting close behind me, for she rightly assumed that I was attending to her dietary needs, and seemed to think her supervision was well in order, as she watched my every move, waiting for her dinner to be served. I was beginning to feel like the cat's butler, and discerned that a bow might be in order as I waited on this elegant queen. I pulled out a plate from the refrigerator covered in plastic with a sign on it reading Periwinkle's dinner tonight, along with strict instructions on how the salmon should be poached. Periwinkle watched me attentively as I poached her fish, and once I had cooked it and served it to her, she meowed and then began to eat it hungrily, despite the fact that it was piping hot. She seemed to like it that way. After her meal was served, she began to clean herself with her paws, and then returned to the couch to continue her sleeping. No wonder they say it's a cat's life. I knew I should be studying, but after my dinner, feeling satisfied and content, I also returned to the settee with Periwinkle once again, taking pride of place on my lap. I reasoned with myself that reading the book tonight would be absolutely fine, just for tonight, I told myself, and then tomorrow I would return back to my student studies. I realised with horror that I was beginning to sound exactly like my mother, who always decided that she would eat the chocolate cake just today, and tomorrow the diet would begin, but invariably tomorrow never ever came. Darkness descended over the entire front yard, and a half-moon broke out over the horizon, along with a pretty scattering of silvery stars. My eyes suddenly shut, closing like blinds on a window, and then my head drooped to one side, and my body finally tilted over, and I began to fall into a deep sleep. All of a sudden I was awoken to a heavy crashing sound as a rock was flung through the window, landing on the couch only yards away from me. And the cat just jumped up with a start, bolting from the settee. Her tail puffed up to double the size, and she bolted up the sweeping staircase as fast as she could. She was clearly quite alarmed by the sudden commotion. What the hell, I thought, as another rock came flying through the window, missing me by mere inches. This wasn't funny at all. Someone could get seriously hurt. I looked down in horror at the shattered glass strewn over the floor. It was a complete, total and utter mess. My first thought was that some mischievous kids in the neighbourhood had learnt that a young student was house-sitting and took it upon themselves to throw rocks at me through the window as some sort of daredevil prank. I could feel that anger rising up in my chest. I'll make sure they pay for the damage, I thought, determined to catch the naughty offenders. I quickly switched on the outside light that lit up Elizabeth's yard quite brightly. I was expecting to hear little giggles and see little shadows darting behind the bushes in Elizabeth's yard, but that was not what I saw. Instead, I saw this large, dark silhouette that seemed rather obscure in the light. But what was it? This thing towered at about 8 foot tall and was covered in long, flowing hair, and its overall body shape was distinctly human, with the exception of its arch-shaped head. I'd never seen or heard of such a creature like this before, that was so powerfully muscular, dwarfing a human dramatically, both in girth, size, stature and weight. Yet this creature was predominantly human. Yet aspects of the anatomy were strikingly ape-like. I was too shocked at what I was discerning that I almost forgot to be afraid. The only way I can describe it is when you are so shocked by something, it literally throws you off course, almost suppressing your emotional response to it. All this happened in what seemed like seconds, but the gravity of that moment was so large and impactful that every second of that moment in time was lengthened in my mind like an elastic band stretching in the hands of time and making them last forever. It was in that second I realised the creature was holding a limp-looking body in his hands. It was the motionless body of a woman. The creature placed the body on the ground, pointed to me, and then to the woman, and I sensed immediately he was asking me to help the lady. All of a sudden Elizabeth Churchill's warning words ran into my head. Please check on my neighbour Alice. She's a diabetic. I had forgotten to check on her friend. Was this the diabetic woman, I wondered? Was she in need of my help? It seemed very likely. I dashed hurriedly towards the woman, while the strange, reticent creature ran backwards, keeping a safe distance from me, standing next to a tall log-pole pine tree and watching me intently. I began to slap the woman's cheeks to try and rouse her, but she was unresponsive to my touch. Her pale face was white, whiter than a sheet, while her eyes were rolled back in their sockets and I could only see the whites of them. My heart began to pound frantically. I knew instinctively she was suffering from a diabetic coma due to low blood sugar. This was a life-threatening, serious condition that could potentially kill you, and it looked like this woman was hanging on to her life by a tiny thread. I ran into the house to call 911, my heart beating violently in my chest. I grabbed a Coca-Cola from the kitchen fridge and began reviving the woman by pouring it down her throat as quickly as I could. I felt for her pulse, and it was incredibly low, so low that I could barely hear it at all. But slowly and surely I could see her coming around. Her blue lips became pinker very gradually as the colour returned, and then they began to flutter. Then her bluish eyelids blinked, and slowly they opened, and a pink hue had returned to her skin. Slowly and surely she seemed to collect herself and promptly sat up, looking rather disorientated and muddled. In that moment I heard some happy, jubilant whooping sounds and looked up to see the strange creature jumping up and down joyfully on his powerful long legs, and his dancing was not unlike a human jiving and bopping to their favourite music. He looked terribly thrilled. I looked up again and he was gone, seemingly having vanished into the wood green, knowing that his friend was all right. My heart sank because I had warmed to the creature and secretly wished he hadn't left. "Where am I?" said the woman, looking confused. "Who are you?" she asked, her eyes growing wide with fear, as if she believed I was some kind of horrible predator. She started to scream and cry out for help, but I began to calm her down. Calm down, calm down. I'm the house-sitter for Elizabeth Churchill. I think you've just had a diabetic coma. Elizabeth told me to phone you this evening to check that you were all right and that you'd taken your meds. But I'm sorry, I completely forgot. Do you remember what happened? I asked. I think I went into the yard to call my cat, and then everything went fuzzy and hazy. I don't remember anything after that. Thank you for helping me. You saved my life. I'm always forgetting my meds. How stupid of me. I thought I'd taken them. Before long, the EMTs arrived and quickly whisked Alice off to hospital. But the very next day she was back promptly at my front door, armed with a large plate of homemade brownies, to thank me for saving her life. But I knew it was not me she should be thanking, so I invited her in for some tea. She was a delightful woman in her early 60s, with frosty purple hair, which was a common choice for senior citizens in the early 80s. In a trice I was putting down a piping hot cup of tea in front of Alice, who began to sip away at it happily. "Oh, this is lovely," she said. "I really appreciate a man that knows how to make a good cup of tea, and you do. It's quite a skill, you know. It's something that Elizabeth taught me all about, but she's got English ancestry, you know." "Can't say I'm surprised, with a surname like Churchill," I said. "You don't think she's related to Winston Churchill?" "I doubt it. I think I'd have known about it otherwise." "About yesterday. I'd like to take the credit for saving your life yesterday. Yes, I would, but it seems I'm not the one that you need to thank. It was a very strange, peculiar-looking creature covered in long, flowing dark hair that brought you over to the house last night and carried you in his long, powerful arms, alerting me to your dreadful condition. He was very concerned about you and waited to make sure you got up." Alice's blue eyes sparkled. "Well, I never! You mean Malachite brought me over to your house? He carried me here? Goodness gracious, that is extraordinary. I'd never have thought it possible. He's always been painfully shy. I wouldn't have thought he had it in him to alert you to my condition. I don't know what to say. I'm completely and totally overwhelmed." "Well, you should be, because this incredible, astonishing creature saved your life. In my book, that makes him a hero. Even more so if he overcame his dreadful shyness to come to your rescue. That makes him victorious to overcome such an impediment. I'm intrigued. Who is Malachite?" I asked. "Where does he come from? And why is he so attached to you? I've never ever seen a creature like him before. I'm not going to deny that." Alice's fingers began to shake, and her blue eyes glittered with delight. It was clear that she was touched to the quick that Malachite had saved her very life. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "I'll only tell you because you've seen Malachite for yourself, but if you hadn't seen him, you would dismiss my account and put me down as a crazy, batty old woman. I know you would." I thought about it for a moment, and I knew Alice was absolutely right. Who would believe such a nonsensical claim? I know I wouldn't. Imagine saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm friends with an ape-like humanoid." I imagine that would go down like a lead balloon, especially with all my friends, and eyes would almost certainly be rolled, and people would glance at each other knowingly, as if to say, "The man is a complete fruitcake, but we'll humour him." They would almost certainly think I'd dined out on magic mushrooms and was clearly hallucinating. "Go on, Alice," I said. "Tell me everything. When did you first see Malachite?" It was winter, and it was freezing cold out there. I'd gone out to get some firewood, and I was chopping it myself, bringing it back into the house to make a lovely warm fire. It was so cold that day. The temperatures had really plummeted. The house felt like a freezer. That was when I heard a rustling sound, and the noise of my wheelie bin being dragged along the ground. I knew it was possibly a wild animal, and I peered around the corner to see a bear digging around in my bin looking for food. Despite the fact that it was covered with a thick, full coat of dark hair, it appeared to be shivering. In that second, the creature looked up at me, and our eyes met. I'll never forget those hauntingly beautiful eyes, kind but sad. They touched my heart deeply. "You weren't afraid?" I asked, looking surprised. I mean, the creature is very intimidating. A lot of people would have screamed and run away for their lives." "No, not me. I'm not easily spooked," said Alice. "I was more concerned about the creature's welfare, and naturally assumed he was cold and hungry. I really wanted to help him. As you can't turn your back on all God's creatures, we should help whenever we can, and play our part. I looked at the creature and pointed at the house, and then to my mouth, and I started acting like I was chewing, and then I pointed directly at him. It was my way of expressing that I was going back into the house to get some food for him. I really sensed he understood exactly what I was saying, and I believe he did. When I returned to the bin with a large blanket and a bag of fruit, biscuits, and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on brown bread, I truly thought he would have disappeared, because I could sense the creature was very evasive and shy, but he was still there waiting for me in expectation. I placed the blanket over my body to demonstrate what it was used for, and put it down along with the food. The creature was standing about 6 foot away from me, and inched forward very slowly, and when he discovered the peanut butter sandwiches, he smelt them first, took a bite, and waffled them down in a few seconds. He seemed so hungry, and then he wrapped the blanket around himself and glided back into the woods, glancing over his shoulders at me, as if to say thank you. He was carrying the bag of food in his hands that I'd given him. Every day at the same time that creature was waiting for me to bring him something to eat, and he would bring me little gifts like river stones, twigs, feathers, birds' nests, and stuff like that in return. It was his way of saying thank you to me. But we never ever got physically close to each other, because of his painful shyness. Until now, of course. Well, he certainly overcame his reticence when he found you passed out on the lawn like that. He knew that he wanted to help you. It seems like you have a guardian angel watching over you after all. All these years later, I know the creature I encountered that night, as a university student, was a Bigfoot. Sadly, Alice has long since passed away, but I'm glad to inform you that she died of natural causes and not of a diabetic coma, which could so easily have taken her at any time. I know her story would have been buried under the ground with her, never to be remembered any more, if I hadn't got embroiled in it in some way. She is not here to share her story with you, but I am sure she wouldn't mind me doing so on her account, and sharing her Bigfoot secret. I have 2 sons that refuse to believe that Bigfoot is real, and are always making fun of any believers. I have never told them my story, and I am less inclined to do so now, but I know that my secret is safe with you. So there you are. That's my story. Well, your secret is very definitely safe with us. Until next time, goodbye and good night.